Albert Einstein said, "Don't think about why you question, simply don't stop questioning." Welcome to Curated Questions. I am your host, Ken Woodward. And these questions are not mathematical equations, but rather a resource to encounter personal reflection and growth. As Tupac Shakur stated, even the genius asks questions. Now, let's engage the questioning community. Greetings. Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you are here. This episode explores an impactful political question that was asked when I was 10 years old. I may not remember it being asked, but it has been asked every election cycle since. Now, I acknowledge that politics has exhausted everyone listening, and we would all just rather watch cat videos. However, this exploration does not advocate for any particular candidate or agenda, and it provides lessons for us today. The rhetorical question that 1980 presidential candidate and California Governor Ronald Reagan asked during the closing moments of the debate with incumbent President Jimmy Carter has become part of the lexicon of every presidential contest since. We analyze the context and acknowledge its influence on the election and the broader lessons it offers for crafting robust, thought-provoking questions. By examining this question's simplicity and resonance, listeners will learn how to apply similar techniques in their personal and professional lives to ask impactful questions that drive reflection and action. The political climate leading up to the 1980 presidential debate between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan was tense and marked by several significant factors. The United States faced severe economic difficulties due to high inflation, and unemployment rates were causing widespread discontent among voters. Also, the country was experiencing a recession, which Reagan effectively used to criticize Carter's economic policies. Several international issues were weighing on the public mind, such as the ongoing Iran hostage crisis, which began nearly a year earlier on November 4, 1979, and was a significant point of contention. This crisis had initially boosted Carter's popularity, but was increasingly seen as a symbol of his administration's ineffectiveness. Additionally, there were growing concerns about the U.S.'s global standing and responsibilities with emphasis on Russia and the use of nuclear weapons. The political environment was undergoing significant changes with the rise of the religious right, becoming a major factor in American politics, ultimately benefiting Reagan. Reagan had secured the Republican nomination after a competitive primary season, defeating candidates George H.W. Bush and John Anderson. Despite the challenges facing Carter, the election remained competitive. Reagan had entered the general election with a strong lead in the polls. However, by October, the race had tightened considerably since Carter had somehow turned a dismal summer into a close race for the pending second term. The upcoming debate was set for a week before the election and was seen as a crucial moment in the campaign. The political climate was charged with economic uncertainty, foreign policy challenges, and a closely contested election. It was the only one-on-one debate scheduled between Carter and Reagan. There was significant anticipation as the debate was considered decisive in such a close race. Both candidates saw the debate as a critical opportunity to sway voters in the campaign's final days. Therefore, the stage was set. On the evening of Tuesday, October 28, 1980, at the Music Hall in Cleveland, Ohio, with a light drizzle pelting down outside, in his closing moments of the 90-minute debate, presidential candidate Ronald Reagan looked into the camera and said the following.
Next Tuesday, all of you will go to the polls, will stand there in the polling place and make a decision. I think when you make that decision, it might be well if you would ask yourself, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Is it easier for you to go and buy things in the stores than it was 4 years ago? Is there more or less unemployment in the country than there was 4 years ago? Is America as respected throughout the world as it was? Do you feel that our security is as safe, that we're as strong as we were 4 years ago? And if you answer all of those questions yes, why then I think your choice is very obvious as to who you'll vote for. If you don't agree, if you don't think that this course that we've been on for the last 4 years is what you would like to see us follow for the next 4, then I could suggest another choice that you have.
Pause a moment and consider where the question hits you today. Where do you feel it in your body? What emotions come to the surface? What pictures race through your mind? Here it is 44 years later, and this question is just as effective as when it was delivered on that drizzly October evening. As for how the electorate responded, in one word, landslide. On November 4th, Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter. Reagan received 489 electoral votes to Carter's 49. The popular vote was approximately 51% to 41%. Voters and pundits all agreed that the primary rhetorical question is what shifted the vote in Reagan's favor and began an 8-year stay in the White House. Absolutely remarkable. And this is the power of an impactful question. Now that we have experienced the question, let's further analyze it. We will discuss what a rhetorical question is, further explore how the original audience might have processed it, evaluate the 4 parts of the question anatomy, learn 6 lessons about impactful questions, and consider current applications. First up, let's define what a rhetorical question is. And no worries, I got you. Keep your hands on the steering wheel, and via the Google Oracle, I checked Merriam-Webster for us, and this is what it had to say. A rhetorical question is not a question about the art of speaking effectively. It is a question that is asked for effect rather than from a desire to know the answer. Close quote. For example, would it kill you to stop chewing your food with your mouth open? As any parent and child knows, a verbal answer is neither desired nor required. Additionally, I appreciate Wikipedia's definition of a rhetorical question being, quote, asked for a purpose other than to obtain information, close quote. Reagan specifically connected Carter's economic policies to the current felt experience of the voters. One of the powers questions contain is the perceived need to answer immediately. Unless you are being graded on a test or answering an officer's question about your speed, quick nod to those driving, there usually is time to actually consider the answer. Over the following 7 days, I'll assume few of the 1980 voters actually broke out their 1976 taxes to conduct a comprehensive analysis of their financial buying power, compared unemployment rates, stock market valuations, local crime statistics, and U.S. world standing, but instead focused on a felt sense of personal well-being. As much as we would like to think we make decisions logically, data has confirmed emotions play a far more significant role. Reagan shifted the focus to personal economic well-being in elections. He was known as an eternal optimist, and since he wasn't the incumbent, he could gain votes on the promises of a brighter tomorrow. Carter had led the country through a very austere time. In 1977, he called on all Americans to turn down their home thermostats to 65 degrees Fahrenheit in the daytime and lower temps at night to help cope with what Carter called an energy, quote, crisis. I'm confident folks remembered that request. Reagan painted a picture of possibilities to gain votes. Carter had to overcome his previous and current challenges while charting a course for better days ahead. So on the personal front, my dad was a lifelong Republican, native Californian, and entrepreneur. He loved everything about Reagan. In 1980, my parents were recently divorced. My sister went with my mom, and I stayed with my dad, so he was my world. All of these years later, Reagan's impactful question is still ever present in the political scene, and at the same time reminds me of my dad and his love for this charismatic leader. Now, let's dissect the question and look at an impactful question's anatomy. And disclaimer, no questions were harmed in the making of this podcast. And yeah, no charge for the dad joke. You're welcome. Number 1, simplicity and clarity. Reagan used simple words to convey an impactful concept into a memorable, bite-sized question impossible to ignore. It addressed key issues of the time: economic hardship, national security, and global respect, making it timely and urgent. Number 2, personal relevance. The question invited voters to reflect on their own experiences rather than abstract political ideology. The question was relevant to everyone and was one voters would carry into the voting booth with them. Number 3, emotional resonance. This question stirred up emotions of difficult times over the previous 4 years with Carter. Difficult moments stick in our memories longer as a way to learn from the past mistakes. Reagan didn't have to list every trouble. The question, "Are you better off?" taps directly into the deep memories of hardship or success. The voters' brains were quick to unearth these memories without effort. Remembering instances of goodness over the last 4 years took more intentional effort. Number 4, timing and context. Reagan intentionally asked this primary and the follow-up questions at the end of the debate. Carter had no opportunity to rebut or explain how anything he did brought about a better world than he inherited in 1976. Social media didn't exist for him to get his response to the public. 1980 didn't include the avalanche of overwhelming news, communications channels, and distractions we have today. Reagan anchored this question in voters' minds 1 week before the election in the last moments of the only debate, allowing him to contrast their positions without going overtly hostile. Reagan gave voters something to chew on as they went to bed and talk about at the water cooler the following day at work. Any incumbent today must invariably include the answer to this question in their talking points in a preemptive strike to prepare voters when the question is asked. I discovered 6 lessons for asking impactful questions by reviewing this question. Number 1, focus on the audience's perspective. Reagan was running a tight race against an incumbent who was surging in the polls. He needed voters to connect to his eternal optimism for a better tomorrow, so he met them where they were, sitting at the kitchen tables trying to pay their bills today. Ensure your question addresses pressing issues or concerns your audience cares about. Number 2, use rhetorical questions to engage listeners. He gave voters a question to chew on that is equivalent to today's viral tune. You know, the one you just can't seem to get out of your head. Intentionally craft questions to meet listeners where they are at to achieve the most significant impact. Frame questions that encourage self-reflection or emotional engagement. Number 3, simplify complex issues into relatable terms. No complicated or fancy words, just bite-sized. He gave an overarching question with 4 specific follow-up questions with seemingly measurable answers. But other than unemployment, all were based on emotion. Avoid jargon or overly complex phrasing. Focus on universal relevance. Number 4, timing is crucial. Consider the broader context. Reagan knew this debate was his opportunity to swing voters to his vision. He gave voters a simple, personal metric for them to justify their decision in the voting booth. Number 5, encourage self-reflection and personal assessment. Allow space for an answer to develop. We're in the business of using rhetorical questions for the betterment of humanity, and not as interested in the, quote, stop chewing with the mouth open kind of question mentioned earlier. Use these questions as gardeners use their tools to promote flourishing and growth. Number 6, call to action. Reagan reminded viewers their answer resulted in direct action, a vote for more of the same or a vote for change. In the definition I mentioned earlier, the rhetorical question is asked for effect rather than from a desire to know the answer. When you ask the questions, know what effect you seek to create. A great question doesn't just provoke thought, it motivates decision-making or change. These are the 6 lessons I came away with. What's your number 7? What comes to mind for you? I mean, what did I miss? I'm sure there's something. Now let's take a look at modern applications. Now that we have spent time pulling the question apart and better understanding the original audience, consider the question for yourself. If you have been around for an election cycle or two, reflect upon how politicians have used this question to sway your vote and how you responded. This is not an exercise to prompt judgment or to poke anyone in the eye, but rather discover how this question has worked on you. I know I have my own personal history, which is why I find this question so fascinating. Think about the last election you heard this question. Did you feel the knee-jerk need to answer right away when your politician asked? Did you actually do the homework to determine what factors were most important to you, then look at data vice depending on emotion? Is it any easier to see why someone in a different circumstance may answer differently than you? How did the question affect your answer when the opposing politician asked? Did you use the same metric for the candidates or give your preferred candidate extra leeway? Interrogating our own responses can foster empathy when we see others getting riled up and whipped around by political shenanigans. As you consider your audience during your next presentation, sales pitch, podcast, or getting your kids to eat lima beans, think about how rhetorical questions might be used to bring about greater understanding and alignment. No promises on the lima beans. A bullet point with a memorable phrase has its place. But as we've seen, the staying power of an impactful question can be revolutionary. This episode explored Ronald Reagan's famous 1980 campaign question, "Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?" The question's simplicity and personal relevance to voters made it incredibly powerful, helping Reagan win the presidency and shaping American political discourse for decades to come. Reagan's questions succeeded by focusing on the individual voter's experience rather than abstract policy debates. It encouraged self-reflection and tapped into the economic anxieties of the time. The question's impact teaches us 6 valuable lessons about crafting influential questions. The question's impact teaches us 6 valuable lessons about crafting influential queries. Number 1, focus on the audience's perspective. Number 2, use rhetorical questions to engage listeners. Number 3, simplify complex issues into relatable terms. Number 4, timing is crucial, so consider the broader context. Number 5, encourage self-reflection and personal assessment. And number 6, a call to action. By studying this historical question, we can improve our ability to ask impactful questions in various contexts, from politics to business and personal growth. The enduring legacy of Reagan's query demonstrates how a well-crafted question can change the course of debate, an election, or even history itself. And there you have it. Thank you for coming along on this journey to explore this question you will encounter anytime a politician seeks your vote. This deep dive into a question was a labor of love due to my personal story with the question. I'd appreciate your feedback on this format structure and any comments about the additional lessons learned from Reagan's famous question. What famous questions continue to pop up in your world? Share in the comments or email to info@curatedquestions.com. Gratitude shout out to Beauty Pill for the show's music and producer Ben Ford for the technical help. This episode was recorded on Piscataway land. This year is all about letting others know about the Curated Questions resource. Your engagement is what informs the algorithm that this podcast is worth introducing to new folks. Please engage with this episode in some manner. Download, follow, save, like, share, or comment about something that resonated. This action ensures we are engaging the questioning community. Until next time, keep questioning.